The ship hung silent in the dark space between stars. It had been there for 300 cycles, watching the small blue world that spun slowly around its yellow sun. The watchers inside were patient. Their kind had learned patience over 2,000,000 years of traveling between the stars. Ambassador Velkith stood at the observation window, his 4 eyes fixed on the planet below. His skin shifted colors as he thought, moving from deep blue to troubled purple. Behind him, the other members of the collective's observation team worked at their stations, gathering data, recording signals, and trying to make sense of what they were seeing. "Another war," said his assistant, a young Siorani named Kethel. "That makes 47 major conflicts in the last 100 cycles alone." Velkith did not turn from the window. And yet they advance. It was the great puzzle, the great worry. Every other species the collective had ever observed followed the same path. First came wisdom. A species would learn to live in peace with itself, to balance its needs against its world, to think in terms of generations rather than moments. Only then would the great discoveries come. Only then would a species reach for the stars. Humans had done it. Backwards. They had split the atom while still fighting wars over borders and beliefs. They had decoded the very instructions that built their bodies, while still arguing about whether all humans deserved the same rights. They had created machines that could think while still struggling to feed all their people. They had started to change other worlds while their own world grew sick around them. By every measure the collective used, humans should have destroyed themselves long ago. They had the weapons. They had the anger. They had the fear. 100 times, Velkith had watched them come to the edge of ending everything. 100 times, he had prepared to record the final moments of another failed species. And 100 times, somehow, they had stepped back. "The Collective Council wishes to know your assessment," Kethel said. "They are growing concerned." Velkith finally turned from the window. His colors settled into the gray of careful thought. "Tell them what I have told them before. Humans are a paradox. Their technical intelligence rivals civilizations twice their age. Their ability to solve problems is remarkable. Give them a challenge, and they will throw themselves at it with a focus that borders on madness. And their wisdom? They possess the wisdom of children playing with fire." Velkith moved to his station and called up the latest data. "Look at this. In the last 10 cycles alone, they have developed artificial minds that can create art, solve scientific problems, and hold conversations that fooled our own people. They are rewriting the rules of medicine, energy, and matter itself. Impressive. Terrifying." Velkith's colors flashed red for a moment. They do not understand what they are building. They cannot see where these paths lead. They create tools that could reshape the universe, and they treat them like toys. Kethel studied the data with growing unease. Then why does the collective not act? Surely we should warn them, guide them, help them develop the wisdom they lack. The first law forbids it. Velkith's voice carried the weight of ancient knowledge. Civilizations must rise or fall on their own. We can watch. We can record. We cannot interfere. To do so would be to deny them the chance to become what they might become, or to stop them from becoming something dangerous. The words hung in the air between them. It was the fear that no one in the collective wanted to speak aloud. What if a species developed intelligence without wisdom and survived anyway? What if they spread beyond their world before they learned to control themselves? What would that mean for the rest of the galaxy? Velkith returned to the window. Below, the blue world turned slowly, covered in swirls of white cloud. It looked peaceful from this distance. Beautiful, even. But he knew what was happening on that surface. The struggles, the conflicts, the brilliant, terrible inventions pouring out of human minds with no thought of consequence. "They sent ships to their neighboring world last cycle," he said quietly. They are building structures there, making places where humans can live. So soon? They have not even fixed the problems on their own world. That is what I mean. Any other species would wait. They would solve the problems at home first. They would make sure they were ready. Valkith's colors shifted to something Cathal had never seen before. A mix of fear and wonder, and something that might have been respect. Humans do not wait. They do not make sure they are ready. They see a problem and they attack it. They see a possibility and they reach for it. They are hungry in a way I have never seen before. Ambassador, what do you recommend? Valkith was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of his decision. We continue to watch. We record everything. And we pray to whatever forces guide the universe that they learn wisdom before it is too late. He paused. Or that they find something else. Something that works for them, even if we cannot understand it. And if they do not? If they destroy themselves, or worse, spread their chaos to others? Valkith had no answer to that. He simply stood at the window and watched the impossible species below, building wonders and horrors with equal enthusiasm, racing toward a future that no one could predict. Most species learned wisdom before they learned to split atoms. Humans had done it, backwards, and somehow, impossibly, they were still alive. The Kaveth Dominion had ruled their section of the galaxy for 50,000 years. They were not cruel by nature, but they were practical. When a new species appeared near their borders, they followed a simple process. First, a warning. Then, if the warning was ignored, a demonstration of power. Finally, submission and integration into the Dominion's order. It had worked every time. Wisdom, after all, meant knowing when you were outmatched. The 3 human exploration ships appeared at the edge of Dominion space on what humans would call a Tuesday morning. They were small vessels, poorly armed, filled with scientists and explorers who had come seeking knowledge and contact with other minds. The Dominion sent no warning. The first ship vanished in a flash of light so bright it burned out its own recording equipment. The second managed to send a partial distress signal before it too was destroyed. The third tried to run. It did not get far. In the cold meeting rooms of the Dominion High Command, officers reviewed the attack with satisfaction. The new species had been taught its place. Now would come the expected response. Grief, then negotiation, then acceptance of Dominion authority. It was how things always worked. Across the galaxy, the collective of 12 detected the attack. Valkith watched the reports come in with growing dread. He had seen this pattern before. A young species would encounter an older power, and the outcome was always the same. Submission or destruction. Those were the only choices that wisdom allowed. But humans, he was beginning to understand, did not always choose wisely. The first human response came within days. Not diplomats. Not pleas for mercy. Instead, human ships descended on the debris field where their people had died. They collected every piece of wreckage they could find, including fragments of the weapons that had killed them. They are mourning, a Dominion analyst reported, gathering their dead. Expected behavior. The analyst was wrong. In laboratories across human space, scientists began to study the fragments. They worked in shifts that stretched for days without rest. They shared data across distances that should have made communication impossible. They argued and collaborated and pushed themselves past every reasonable limit. 6 standard cycles after the attack, a human engineer named Park held up a small device and smiled through her exhaustion. "I know how their shields work," she said, "and I know how to break them." 12 cycles after the attack, human weapons factories began producing new missiles. They were crude by Dominion standards, but they carried something the Dominion had never faced before. A warhead designed specifically to pass through their shields as if they did not exist. 20 cycles after the attack, the first human warships left their construction yards. They were ugly vessels, built for function rather than beauty. They were crewed by men and women who had volunteered knowing they might not return. And they were angry. The Dominion's intelligence service sent increasingly alarmed reports to their commanders. "This is impossible," they insisted. "No species advances this quickly. It should take them generations to match our technology. They are doing it in months." "Then they are cheating somehow," a senior officer replied. "Find out how." The answer, when it came, was disturbing. There was no trick. There was no hidden advantage. Humans were simply working themselves beyond what any sane species would attempt. Their scientists slept in their laboratories. Their engineers forgot to eat. Their military commanders planned attacks while medics treated them for exhaustion. They did not weigh the costs. They did not calculate the odds. They simply threw themselves at the problem with a desperate fury that the Dominion had never encountered. Velketh watched from his observation post, recording everything. "This is what I feared," he told Kethel. "They had been hurt, and now they are reacting. Not with wisdom, not with careful planning, with raw, blind determination. Perhaps they will burn themselves out. Such effort cannot be sustained. Perhaps," Velketh's colors shifted to dark gray, "or perhaps they will sustain it long enough to matter. That is what makes them dangerous. They do not know when to stop. They do not understand the concept of acceptable losses." The first battle came 3 months later, near a small outpost at the edge of Dominion space. The Dominion commander expected an easy victory. He had superior numbers, superior technology, and thousands of years of military tradition behind him. He was dead within an hour. Human ships swarmed in patterns that made no tactical sense. They sacrificed advantages to protect damaged allies. They pressed attacks that should have been abandoned. They fought as if every pilot believed their death would be worth it, as long as they took one more enemy with them. "They are insane," the Dominion commanders told each other. "This is not war. This is madness." But madness, it turned out, could win battles. News of the defeat spread through the Dominion like a disease. For the first time in 50,000 years, doubt crept into the minds of their leaders. They had faced dangerous enemies before. They had never faced an enemy that did not understand fear. Velketh transmitted his observations to the collective with hands that trembled slightly. He had watched many wars. He had seen species rise and fall. But he had never seen anything like this. Humans were not wise. They did not measure costs against benefits. They did not know when a fight was hopeless. And that, he was beginning to understand, made them more dangerous than any species the galaxy had ever seen. The war lasted 3 years by human counting. For the Dominion, it felt like the end of everything. Human generals fought in ways that made no sense. They abandoned strong positions to rescue wounded soldiers who could easily be replaced. They spent resources on long-shot plans that any rational commander would have rejected. They refused surrender terms that would have saved millions of lives, choosing instead to fight for everyone. The Dominion could not understand it. In their 50,000 years of conquest, they had learned one simple truth. War was mathematics. You counted your ships and soldiers. You counted the enemy's ships and soldiers. You calculated the cost of victory against the price of defeat. Then you made the logical choice. Humans did not calculate. Humans did not make logical choices. Humans threw themselves into the fire because something inside them refused to accept the numbers. Akatoa Minders, captured Dominion commander, held in a human prison camp, tried to explain this to his superiors through secret communications. "They do not understand acceptable losses," he wrote. "We tell them that surrender will save 90% of their population. They ask about the other 10%. We tell him those losses are unavoidable. They say nothing is unavoidable. They reject the premise entirely. He paused in his writing, searching for words to describe what he had witnessed. Every death is personal to them. When one of their soldiers dies, they do not simply record it and move on. They remember the name. They tell stories about the dead. They carry photographs and personal items belonging to people who will never return. It makes them unstable, unpredictable, and incredibly, terrifyingly motivated. The turning point came at the Battle of Proxima Relay. The Dominion had centered their communication network around this single point, a hub that connected every fleet and outpost across their territory. Destroy the relay, and the Dominion would be blind and deaf. The war would essentially be over. Human engineers had been working on a solution for weeks. They slept in shifts on the floors of their laboratories. They survived on stimulants and desperate hope. And finally, exhausted beyond reason, they succeeded. The weapon was called the Cascade Device. It would send a pulse through the relay that would spread across the entire Dominion network, destroying every connected system in a chain reaction. It was brilliant. It was elegant. It would end the war in an instant dot. It would also sterilize 4 inhabited moons caught in the blast radius. 2 billion Dominion civilians, families, children, people who had never held a weapon or given an order. The weapon was loaded onto a fast ship. The coordinates were set. The order was given. Admiral Sarah Chun sat alone in her command center, staring at the authorization code on her screen. One word, and it would be done. The war would be over. Humanity would be safe. 2 billion people would be dead. Her hand hovered over the console. Around her, officers waited in silence. They knew what the weapon would do. They knew the cost. And they were prepared to pay it because the alternative was more years of war, more human deaths, more suffering without end. Chun thought about the faces of her crew. The letters she had written to the families of soldiers who had died under her command. The promises she had made that their sacrifices would mean something. She thought about the Dominion civilians on those moons. People who had never asked for this war. Children who would never understand why fire fell from the sky. She thought about what humanity would become if they did this. What they would see when they looked in the mirror. What stories their children would tell about how the Great War ended. No, she said. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Admiral? Her first officer stepped forward, confusion on his face. The order has been given. Command has authorized the strike. I know what command has authorized. Chun's voice was steady, though her hands had begun to shake. And I am countermanding that order. We do not do this. We do not become this. Find another way. Admiral, there may not be another way. The casualties we will suffer if we continue fighting will be our choice to suffer. Chun stood and faced her crew. She looked exhausted. She looked older than her years. But her eyes were clear. We are not murderers. We are not monsters. If we win this war by killing 2 billion innocent people, then we have not won anything. We have just become a different kind of Dominion. The crew was silent. Some of them agreed with her. Some of them thought she was throwing away their best chance at victory. But all of them understood that she had made her choice, and they would follow her. Finding another way took 6 more months. It cost 50,000 more human lives. It required sacrifices and risks that pushed humanity to the breaking point and beyond. But they found it. Velketh recorded the moment for the collective's archives. His colors shifted through patterns that his species had no names for. He had watched millions of civilizations across millions of years. He had never seen anything like this. Humans had the capacity to commit genocide. They had the justification, the provocation, the ability. They had stared into the abyss and seen how easy it would be to fall. And they had chosen not to, not because they lacked the intelligence to see that it was efficient, but because something deeper than intelligence, something that defied all logic and reason, had stayed their hand. Velkith did not know what to call it. He was not sure there was a word in any language he knew, but he knew with growing certainty that it mattered, that it might be the most important thing he had ever witnessed. The war was almost over, and humanity had shown itself to be something the galaxy had never seen before. The war ended on a cold morning on a planet that humanity had never seen before. Dominion leaders, their faces showing the marks of defeat, sat across a long table from human diplomats who looked almost as exhausted as they did. The terms of surrender were complete. The Dominion would withdraw from all contested space. They would pay reparations for the ships they had destroyed without warning. They would recognize humanity's right to exist and expand. Their 50,000 years of conquest were over, but even as the documents were signed, questions hung in the air that no treaty could answer. What would happen now? What would humanity become with this power? What would they do with the technology they had captured, the territories they had gained, the reputation they had built? The Dominion feared the answer. The rest of the galaxy waited to see. 3 months later, a human diplomatic ship arrived at the boundary of collective space. It was small, unarmed, and carried a single message. Humanity wished to talk. Velkith was chosen to receive them. He had spent more time watching humans than anyone else in the collective. He had recorded their wars and their wonders. He had seen them at their worst and at their best. If anyone could understand them, it should be him. The human delegation was led by a woman named Chen. Velkith recognized her from his records. She was the admiral who had refused to use the Cascade device, who had chosen 50,000 human deaths over 2 billion Dominion deaths, who had made the decision that more than anything else had convinced Velkith that humans were something new. They met in a room designed for such encounters. Neutral furniture that could accommodate many body types. Careful lighting that would not offend any species' eyes. Translation devices that hummed quietly, turning words into meaning. "You are intelligent beyond your years," Velkith said, once the formal greetings were complete. "You have achieved in centuries what took us millions of years. Your technology, your adaptability, your ability to solve problems. It is remarkable." Chun nodded. She had heard such things before. "But intelligence without wisdom is a blade without a handle," Velkith continued. "It cuts the one who holds it as surely as the enemy. You move too fast. You build things before you understand them. You solve problems without asking whether you should." "You're right," Chun said. The word surprised him. He had expected argument, defense, the pride that he had seen so often in young species who had won their first great war. "We are dangerous," Chun continued. "We know this. We have always known this. Every generation, we warn the next. Be careful. Think before you act. Consider the consequences." She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "And every generation ignores the warning and charges ahead anyway. Then why give the warning at all?" "Because that is who we are." Chun leaned forward in her chair. "Ambassador, I watched my world tear itself apart more times than I can count. Wars that made no sense. Weapons built for no reason except that they could be built. Suffering created by intelligent people who refused to be wise. And yet you continue. And yet we continue." Chun's eyes met his. "Do you want to know what makes us different? What really makes us terrifying? It is not our intelligence. It is not our adaptability. It is not our ability to solve problems." Velkith waited. "It is the fact that we know exactly what we are," Chun said. "We know our flaws. We know our weaknesses. We see the monster in the mirror every single day. And every single day, we fight it. We do not always win. We often fail, but we never stop fighting. That is not wisdom, Velkith said slowly. No, it is not. Chun sat back. Wisdom would be solving the problem, fixing ourselves, becoming what we should be. We cannot do that. We have tried for thousands of years, and we cannot do it. So instead, we do the only thing we can. We struggle. We wrestle with our own nature. We build chains to bind ourselves and then break free and then build stronger chains. It sounds exhausting. It is. For a moment, something flickered across Chun's face. Weariness that went deeper than the war, deeper than the years of service. The kind of tiredness that came from fighting an enemy that lived inside your own heart. But it is who we are. And I think, in a strange way, it might be what saves us. Velkith was quiet for a long time. Around him, his assistants recorded everything, storing data that the collective would study for generations. But he knew that no amount of data would capture what was happening in this room, what was being revealed. The collective has watched many civilizations, he said finally. We have seen wisdom and foolishness. We have seen species rise to greatness and fall to destruction. We have categories, labels, ways of understanding the universe. And we do not fit your categories. No, Velkith's colors shifted to something new. Something that might have been respect. You do not. You are intelligent without wisdom, but aware of your folly. You are dangerous beyond measure, but you chain yourselves. You have the power to destroy, but you choose not to. Not always, Chun said. We do not always choose right, but you choose. That is what matters. Other species follow their nature. They do what wisdom or instinct tells them. They do not fight against themselves. Velkith paused. You are different. You are at war with your own hearts. And somehow, against all odds, you keep winning. Not every battle, but enough. The meeting continued for hours. They discussed treaties and borders and the future relationship between humanity and the collective. But Velkith knew that the most important exchange had already happened. Later, as the human ship departed, Kethel approached him with a question. Ambassador, what will you tell the council? How will you categorize them? Velkith watched the human ship disappear into the distance. He thought about Admiral Chun and her impossible choice. About human scientists working themselves to death. About a species that knew its own flaws and fought against them anyway. I will tell them the truth, he said. Humans are not wise. They may never be wise. But they are aware of their folly, and they struggle against it with everything they have. That is not wisdom. But it might be something else. Something we have never seen before. What would you call it? Velkith considered the question. He ran through every concept he knew, every category his species had developed over 2 million years of studying life among the stars. I would call it human, he said finally. I do not think there is another word that fits. The collective voted to extend an invitation to humanity. Not as full members. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But as something new. Something that did not fit the old categories, but might help create new ones. They will be watched. They would be studied. And if they ever stopped fighting against their own worst impulses, if they ever let their intelligence fully slip its chains, the collective would be ready. But Velkith suspected that would not happen. He had seen too much. He had understood too well. Humanity's greatest strength was not their brilliant minds. It was not their terrible adaptability. It was not their power to destroy. It was their endless, exhausting, impossible war against themselves. And that, more than anything else, made them terrifying.